um, agenda items that need to be modified, added, or deleted. Are we all comfortable with today's agenda? Okay, I'm taking that as a yes. So let's open the PRAC meeting. Todd, are we going to be recording today?
Yes, sorry, I did go ahead and start the recording when you started just now.
Okay, very good. I see that now on my screen. So thank you for setting the meeting. I'll open the Public Records Advisory Council meeting for June 24th. It is 12:03 p.m. Welcome, everybody. We have an agenda that's pretty brief and to the point. Hopefully, we won't take the whole time, but we have approved today's agenda, and we are now on item number 2, finalization of process, including questions for Agency Director, 360 review of Public Records Advocate. I gather that we're going to have Yufeng walk us through that. Is that a fair characterization? I'm hoping so.
Yes, Mark.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad I haven't made any mistakes and we're only 2 minutes in. So thank you. Yufeng, why don't you go ahead and take it away? I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So at our last meeting, we agreed that there would be additional time for PRAC members to take a look at the draft of the PRAC's version of an Executive 360, especially the questions. And I have received several pieces of feedback that have been incorporated into a second version. That version went around, I think it was last Friday, and has since been posted on our PRAC website. So if folks have had the opportunity to review that and have any additional questions, now would be the time to ask them. But I do also want to take some time just to share my screen and go over some of the major, I guess, substantive changes that were made. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so what you should see in front of you is our version 2 of our review process. In the highlights, I've pointed out some major changes, but most notable is kind of this categorization of evaluators, as well as the addition of an evaluator selection criteria. If you'll recall, at the last meeting, there were some questions about, well, what are the categories of evaluators that we're going to have that we ask to give survey feedback, and how do we go about selecting those evaluators? And taking into account some of the feedback and really good observations from members, I've made some changes here as far as the categories. And notable changes are that we've added a section specifically for public bodies that have received trainings, and the number of public bodies that will be surveyed for that will be around 4. And I'll go over the process as well for that selection. But I do want to point out that we've also kind of, in response to some concerns about, well, how balanced is the number of evaluators going to be, especially requesters from who are members of the public versus requesters who are state and local public entities. And I went ahead and kind of had the largest number that we kind of talked about at the last meeting, which was around 15. And I will note that in the official guidelines for the Evaluator 360 that come down from the governor's office, there is no cap or minimum for the number of individuals surveyed. It's really kind of based on, well, how does the agency operate, what is the normal level of engagement? And so we've just gone ahead and picked these numbers, both as a fair representation of how many individuals we interact with in the office, as well as out of a thought for efficiency of process and kind of being able to complete this process with a fair and balanced number of reviewers, but also as a practical sort of adjustment. So I've gone ahead and put 15 as the number for each category of requester for 3 and 4. These are folks that Todd has worked directly with in the course of his work as the advocate. Now I'm going to go on to the evaluator selection criteria here, and the breakdown is basically 2 distinct types of selection criteria. And the first is for evaluator categories 1, 2, and 5. So that would be all direct reports, easy because that's 1. 2, the voting members of the PRAC, so folks here, as well as members of the PRAC, former members of the PRAC who have served their term within 2 years of our evaluation year. So for those categories, 1, 2, and for 5, which is media representatives and Society of SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists representatives, those folks are already identified. We know who those folks are. So they will, as a matter of course, receive a request to provide feedback. Now, the second sort of criteria is for evaluator categories 3, 4, and 6. So that is members of the public who have received assistance, and state and local public entities, their employees who have received assistance, as well as public bodies that have received training. So those are a long list of folks. Right. So for example, category 3, we have these requesters, members of the public, right? There's a couple of hundred in those categories. So the method of picking the evaluators for 3, 4, and 6 will be at random. It will be a random number generator between the total number, and whichever number that lands up on will end up being the evaluator who is selected. I will note that there's some discretion here on, I guess, on my part, right, in terms of picking these individuals. If during the course of the randomized process, we land on, number 66, and that's a member of the public who sent a request to Todd, but it turns out this was the wrong agency altogether. Right. And Todd responds, hey, actually your request should go to the Secretary of State. And so this is a limited interaction. There really isn't, in my view, unless folks disagree, there really isn't any in-depth response that I think a requester with this level of engagement would be able to have with our survey. So if it's an ephemeral sort of limited contact where it was just, hey, let me point you in the right direction, or let me just, it's a really simple question, right? What exemption talks about confidentiality? Right, it was a one sentence response, right? For those types of sort of limited interactions, those at that point there might be a different number generated to fill that spot. But in consideration of transparency, if that kind of decision is made, if there's a new evaluator that's selected for those limited situations, that action will be tracked and documented, and there will be a reason given for why this was deemed a limited interaction that is not going to produce, or is not anticipated to produce, a sort of meaningful survey response that kind of captures what the information that the PRAC is looking to capture.
Yufeng?
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting. I love the fact that you used the word ephemeral. It's a word that's not used enough. But Michael Crone does have a question, and so I apologize for interrupting, but let's see if we can get Michael's question resolved.
Thanks, Mark. I'm sorry for interrupting too. It wasn't really clear to me that what the best way to do this was, and I just the last thing you just said makes perfect sense to me. My question is not about that, but I did wonder, like, these numbers of evaluators, is that the number of people that we plan to solicit from, or is that the number of responses we're aiming to get, is my first question. And then the second question is even shorter, maybe, is like, I noticed that excluded from this are the non-voting PRAC members, and I wonder if you would sort of be able to talk us through the reasoning of that exclusion. Sorry for the
Yeah.
interruption.
No, I appreciate that. So for your first question, this, I think it's both, right? It represents the number that of individuals that we're going to seek a response from. It doesn't capture how many of them are actually going to respond, right? Because we don't know. And part of my reasoning for that last explanation of the random selection criteria is, well, if it's going to be a limited contact, or if it's going to be sort of kind of a short uh, interaction, then perhaps the chances of getting any response, let alone a meaningful one, are reduced. If if the PRAC wants to discuss kind of enlarging the total number of evaluators with the idea of, hey, hopefully we send out 30 and then we get back 15. I mean, that's something that I'm happy to entertain. But again, it's just, there's a degree of uncertainty about how many folks will actually respond. That said, for the governor's 360, there isn't a like minimum number of evaluators that must be captured, right? So it kind of, there's this
Okay.
degree of
I
voluntariness, right?
don't want to get us too hung up on this, but I do wonder, do you happen to know if DAS has any experience, for example, with how likely people are to respond? Because that, to me, would play into how many people we want to ask. I mean, we could do it a couple of different ways, right? We could just decide we're going to ask 15 people and we'll get the responses we're going to get. We could decide that if we ask, like you said, that if we ask, we would likely get 15 if we had some reason to think that. Or we could just ask a set of people and then figure out how many responses we didn't get and ask some more. But I 15 feels like a lot to me, honestly. So maybe 15 is enough. I just was mainly trying to understand the number.
Michael, I actually tend to agree. I mean, I look at the numbers here, and the maximum number we have are 56 individuals who would be surveyed. And, you know, Yufeng, I appreciate that you want to go through 56 evaluations, but it seems to me that we might want to reduce some numbers here just to make it a little perhaps more manageable. I sort of tend to agree with Michael, but I also understand that we may not have full participation as well. So I get the sort of the struggle here with that.
Yeah, and the model that I kind of used for our numbers is based on kind of a similar, um, smaller state agency, like our office, right? And the number of surveyed parties, right, for that agency was around 40, right? And their
Mhm.
actual results were around 40 as well. So my thoughts are, perhaps the number that we have here is a little on the higher end, but it would already take into account maybe a couple folks who don't participate. So we'd end up getting fewer than 56, but we would still have enough kind of for enough information to get the data points that the PRAC needs. And I think Michael had a second question. So I did not consider the non-voting members of the PRAC because it did not occur to me. So I think it would be fair because it would also encapsulate individuals on a board or council who work directly with the executive director or the agency director. So I'm fine with adding that to category 2.
And Just as a reminder, I think we only have two non-voting members of the PRAC, and that would be Senator Thatcher and Representative Anderson, if my memory serves me correctly. Is that correct?
And Mark, the short irony would be that as non-voting members that the senator and then our office, my boss, we couldn't vote on this proposal. But I think my boss would like to be involved for what it's worth.
I as well.
I think we'll take that as very constructive input, and perhaps we should include the non-voting members. Provided, remember though, one of the things that Yufeng shared with us is that they would have to have served for 2 years. I know Senator Thatcher definitely rings that bell. Yet I don't think Rep. Anderson has at this point. I guess the question then becomes for everybody if has served within 2 years, not having served 2 years.
Right.
Okay.
I do want to
my
clarify
bad.
that.
My bad. Thank you. So if we could include the full PRAC, I think, including the non-voting members, I think that would address that challenge.
Okay, and I don't have very much in addition to what's already been said to report. I will note one substantially different phrasing of a question, which was this question number 7. The original question was essentially something like, does this individual do their work, in accordance with the governor and the enterprise's vision of that work being done, which wouldn't be appropriate for a PRAC specific survey. So that language has just been changed to acts consistently with the statutory responsibilities set out for the advocate in the statute, and with the letter and spirit of Oregon's public records law.
Any additional questions at this point? I do have one, but I want to pause to allow for the members to ask additional questions. Yufeng, could you continue to share
Yes.
share your screen, and then Andy, why don't you go ahead? I know that folks, Andy is representing Representative Anderson here as a member of the PRAC. So go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Mark. So Yufeng, could you go to, I think it's the 4th page. It's where the survey starts.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I'm late to comment on this, but for the first question, you remember the PRAC, there's a yes or no. And then I just, I read the questions today.
Mm-hmm.
What might the board have done differently? So just stop right there. And what has the board done or well? So to me, if we could tighten those up, so in the context of what have the board done differently with respect to what? So
Yeah.
when my boss looks on that, I'm not sure he's going to know how to respond. And then the second one, I think maybe that's more self-explanatory, but for both of those, maybe certainly the first one, tighten it up if we could. What would be the goal of the question in the context?
Yeah, it's funny, Andy, because that's where my questions were exactly as well. Yufeng, I tripped on question number 1 as well, particularly the first question, what might have the board done differently? That was confusing to me. And similarly, what has the board done well or effectively to support the director? I don't know if that necessarily is a question that helps in the evaluation. Maybe I'm wrong here. And what support is needed from the board moving forward? Again, I don't know if those second 2 questions are providing much insight into the advocate. So I'm certainly open to keeping these in place, whatnot, but I did want to have a bit of a discussion about these because I don't know if they lend much insight into the advocate's work. So just open that up for a quick discussion, if we may.
Yeah, I do want to, I suppose by way of explanation, these additional questions were just kind of the generic questions that were populated in the executive 360. I think the idea behind the first sub question at least contemplates, what would the board have done differently, specific to, I guess, the direction of the executive director. I think some boards and councils probably work differently than the PRAC. I think we're a pretty unique animal here. So I agree that some of these sub questions probably are not going to be particularly helpful, especially not for evaluating executive director. So if after the discussion, if the board finds it's appropriate that we do away with these additional questions or consolidate them into one, then that makes sense to me as well.
I'm not going to raise my hand since. Oh, Shasta did. So Shasta did. I'm going to defer to Shasta.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I think maybe the thrust of what we're trying to get at is there anything that is there any role that the board has played in how the advocate has done their job? Is that what we're trying to find out? So just giving people an opportunity to say, like, maybe this is kind of on the council, and then,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe
I
just
think
one question that says, how has the council affected, either positively or negatively, the ability of the director to perform their role?
Yeah, Shasta, I think I kind of tend to agree. It might be that we want to eliminate the very first question, what might the board have done differently, and just leave the remaining two questions. That might be a little bit more helpful, I suppose, at least in my mind.
It still feels to me, Mark, like kind of an odd place to start the evaluation of the director. I guess
Yeah.
and I guess my sort of even prior question is like, are there really questions about the director's performance that we feel like the PRAC members are in a unique place to assess? And if so, like, what are those? And those feel like the things that we should be asking about, or the questions that should be presented only to members of the PRAC. We could certainly ask about Todd's performance in our meetings, for example, which most of the people who interact with Todd wouldn't have, any likelihood of knowing anything about, although of course everyone is welcome to watch our meetings and see how Todd serves us. But maybe we want to ask sort of those sorts of questions about his work, sort of guiding our meetings, doing, background work for our meetings and sort of helping us be prepared for them, like things that only we can really assess of his performance.
Yeah, it maybe to pile on a little bit, has he met expectations for providing training opportunities to the public and to the media? Things, has he, regularly been reporting his mediation um, with state and local governments and the public to the PRAC, things of that nature that would directly sort of reflect upon his work, I think, is what you might be driving at. Is that fair, Michael?
Yeah, those are great examples. Just sort of, if we're going to have questions specific to the council, those to me feel like the kinds of things to ask only council members, because those are great examples. Yeah, Mark.
Okay, I'll go ahead and add two. How about that? The first being has the individual provided the and it's a statutory requirement for the advocate to make that presentation to the board. I believe those annual sort of
Yes.
how the yes the statutorily required reporting on the work of to the PRAC. Has the individual provided the statutorily required reporting on the work of the office of the public records advocate to the PRAC? And then in lieu of this box, it'll just be a yes or no multiple choice, right? And I'll add that in a second. And then yes.
Before we move on from this, like that's a way to frame the question. And I don't want to say this in a way that suggests I think that, we think Todd is doing what he's statutorily required to do and no more, and not in a way that really makes us feel like heard and talked to as a board. But to me, that's not a very useful evaluative question. Like, did he do thing A or thing B? Really, we're, I think, interested in like how thoroughly, how well, how satisfactory was the performance of the work, right?
Right, and it wouldn't be an A or B, yes or no sort of a evaluation. It would be it's tiered like the other questions are. Would that address your concerns, or do you think the question needs to have greater specificity?
I think if you have more than a yes and no, that probably is sufficient. It is a little awkward. Has the individual provided the statutorily required reporting? Unacceptable. Like, I mean, I guess that means no, but it just feels, I mean, you can do it that way and I will
How
understand
well?
it and use it.
How well?
I think that's
Has?
right?
I don't know if I can copy and paste all of this at once. Let's see.
There's a pretty good version of a question in the chat I think Andy put there.
Ah, dear. Do that. Let me look at the one in the chat. Work with the board. I like that language. Oh dear. I'll use that language if folks agree to that. To carry out statutorily. I'm sorry, I'm unable to copy and paste, so statutory responsibilities of the office. other recommendations?
I see Senator Thatcher's hand, please.
Well, okay, and I lost my page here, but I was just pulling straight off of the Oregon Public Records Advocate, the site, and under Office of the Public Records Advocate, it lists the things that the advocate is responsible for. And I think that's kind of the direction you're trying to go, is to pull out the actual responsibilities and maybe break them down further. But I think that should be the thrust of the questions. And you might even put a numeric, rubric or whatever you want to call it, along with the unacceptable, acceptable, effective, very effective, maybe do a 1 through 5 or 0 through 4 or something. I don't know. Sometimes that's used in evaluations, and then you can have this numerical thing to look at, and then you can have a place for comments at the
Yeah.
bottom.
I actually like that idea.
Sure, and that that probably would be a PRAC specific question. I think that I think perhaps that's a breakdown of what's currently question 7. This again, statutory responsibilities is rather broad. So what I could do is I could break down question 7 into each of those listed numbers that the senator referenced, and then have that as a separate question for each with a numerical breakdown.
Well, here are a couple of Yufeng, if I might go back up to question 1 again. Forgive me. Because it seems to me that this is coming from the members of the council. Here's a question: has the advocate been responsive to individuals of the PRAC and to the PRAC as a whole? That's sort of a broad question, but as members of the PRAC, I think it's a relevant question for us to pose.
Responsive
To individual members as well as the full PRAC.
I'll change this as the okay.
Looks good to me. I guess another question we might be able to pose is has he been prepared at our meetings? I think that that's a pretty straightforward, evaluative question. And I'm going to see if any other members have questions that would come from the council members directly about Todd's performance. Any other questions that the members would like to pose here? Not hearing a lot. Oh, Shasta, thank you for bailing me out.
Sorry, I don't have a ton of good ideas, but I did like Senator Thatcher's suggestion of, I mean, even if it's not in the questions, like just kind of giving people a reminder of what the duties of the public records advocate are, those kind of 4 bullet points there, maybe at the top, because, you know, so people can be thinking about like, what are the outcomes that we're looking for and what are, you know, like that, you know, just kind of reading those generic questions, I'm kind of like, what are outcomes? I don't know. But, you know, kind of drilling down more specifically into, you know, transparency and dispute resolution and all that kind of stuff, I think would help kind of get people thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Shasta. I do see Senator Thatcher again.
Yeah, thank you. On some of these things, depending on who's responding, they may or may not have experience or a point of reference to be able to comment whether it's acceptable, unacceptable, or, oh, you do have it in there. Never mind.
Oh.
It's really hard for me to see the screen. It's tiny, but you say no opportunity to observe. So right on. That's all I was going to comment on. Thank you. Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
Any further input on the questionnaire, folks?
Hey, Mark, it's Todd.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick point. Looking at the website gave me an opportunity to update it because the advocate no longer leads the council. So I changed that to serving as a voting member and executive director of the Public Records Advisory Council. Because the advocate is no longer the automatic chair. Type.
I don't think I need to respond to that, do I? All right, folks, we're getting to the point where we're having some long and awkward silence with a whole bunch of people here. So I'm going to call the question, I suppose, at this point. Is everybody comfortable with the questionnaire at this point? All right, I'm going to, we do have a quorum. I would certainly entertain a motion at this point.
Chair Mark, I will most move to accept the 360 review questions as presented by staff and direct staff to conduct the review process.
Thank you, Scott. Do I hear a second?
Second.
And that was that Shasta? Just for the, okay, I just want to make sure we have it on the record here. Once we get notes taken. Okay, we have a second. All in favor, please respond by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Yufeng, I think we can consider the questionnaire completed. Do you need any further direction from us at this point, or are you feeling comfortable with the product?
I'm comfortable. I'll just clarify that with the addition, there will be some, this is not the final form of the survey. With the addition of those 4 distinct criteria that are identified in on the website, providing dispute resolution, providing training, providing guidance, serving as a voting member, those will be added to the survey subsequent to this vote, but the council has authorize me to use the form of survey once that's completed. And the survey itself takes roughly 14 kind of days to go out and receive the feedback, and my report will take probably a couple weeks to generate as well. So in terms of a deadline for me to present the information to the PRAC, what does the PRAC have in mind for that? Because my thoughts are that this would probably be an August presentation.
Thoughts, feedback, Scott?
I'm trying to go back and find my timeline, but that sounds to me about right where we thought we would be. This would be happening in June/July, and then August, September, we would receive that information, and the council would have an opportunity to hear it publicly, perhaps an executive at first, if that's what we want to do, but then hear it, receive it in a public meeting ultimately, and then make a decision about how to proceed. So August, September for a next step makes sense to me.
Great. Any further discussion? We have already approved the questions. We're just getting clarification on the process at this point. All right. I think, folks, we can come to the conclusion that we are done with the questionnaire. And now I'm going back to my agenda for today. Forgive me, folks, popping around. Discussion of ideas for continuing work of the bylaws subcommittee. Well, knowing that Mr. Stauffer is the chair of the bylaws committee, I'll put him on the spot and ask you, Scott. We still have a set of bylaws that have eluded us for 8 years now, and now I think we can begin the actual process of composing some bylaws to guide the public records public records advisory council, I believe, is what we're trying to accomplish here. And so I think, Scott, what we'll probably need are some volunteers to sit on a bylaw committee, not for the purposes of hiring the advocate, but rather for the purposes of providing guidance to the council as to how we actually operate. Is that a fair description of what we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, thank you, Mark. That I think summarizes exactly what I was going to offer. So I think there are two questions. Yes, the next step, I agree with what Mark said, is to actually start drafting bylaws. I kind of anticipate, given how things go for all of our schedules, that'll probably take us into next year. And so hopefully by early second or third quarter of next year, no later than a year from now, hopefully we have something for the full council to chew on. So two questions started prompted by Mark. We did have a standing subcommittee that was set up to be bylaws, and then we got focused on the hiring process. So if this is an opportunity for the council to volunteer if you've not been on that bylaws committee, or revisit your membership on the bylaws committee. So I don't know if we want to take a moment and say, raise your hand if you want to be on the bylaws committee. I'm certainly willing to continue to be a part of that. I see Will, I see Mark, I see Todd. Anybody else? I see Senator Thatcher.
I also think, Scott, I think that Rep. Anderson had expressed previous interest in serving on it as well. Andy, I think he shared that with us in a previous meeting, so I just want to make sure that we don't miss Rep. Anderson. And I think I saw Shasta's hand go up as well. Or no, forgive me, it was Emily. Forgive me. Sorry about that. Emily, I think, raised her hand. I don't know if that's for volunteering or for asking a question, though, Emily.
Yes, it is for volunteering.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Right, and I think that's 1, 2, 3, that's 6, that's 7 of us. I think that's a decent subcommittee.
That's more than enough cooks in the kitchen, I'm sure.
So if anybody has any questions about being on it or off it, maybe email Todd and I after this, and Mark. But the other question, and it maybe kind of relates to what we just took action on, when do we want to start meeting? I had in the back of my head that I would revisit the question of scheduling a bylaw subcommittee meeting more towards the fall, September, October, to get that process going. And especially if the council is going to be meeting again next month, or in August in the next couple months to get the hiring process. I don't want to unduly double folks up on meetings, but I guess my original thought was we kick that off sort of September, October. Is there any objection to that? Does anybody want us to get us moving on that sooner than September? Seeing a bunch of heads shaking no. So if that's the case, then I will put a note for myself to ask the public records advocate in August to send a doodle poll out to that subcommittee, and we can start scheduling things in September, October.
Yeah, and on that point, I would like to avoid, we would, Scott, I'm just looking at the legislative calendar to be sure that we don't have any conflicts. So early to mid-September, I think we'll want to avoid late September.
Yep.
That's right, Mark. Ledge days would start the 23rd, I think, Monday, the 23rd. So that would not be the week to do it.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the wrong interim calendar. I apologize. Yeah, you're correct. So, first, second, or third week of September, Scott, is ideal. If you get into the fourth week of September, we're going to have a lot of missing people.
Likewise, I know that's city recorders conference week is that fourth week, and I know that we bump into other things like League of Oregon Cities fall conference too. So point taken, maybe I'll work with Todd earlier than that just to get it pulled out soon so we can set a date in September.
And Senator Thatcher, please.
There is one day set apart, and I know that doesn't work well for everybody's schedule, but they do set aside a task force day, which
Yes.
can be, all kinds of things like this, where legislators are involved with it. They might have, might schedule it for the 26th is the day that they have scheduled for that during legislative days. So just throwing that out there, you don't have to completely eliminate that last full week of September. There's a day.
Yeah, and in fact, that following day is the request deadline for bills. So we'll all be very, very busy that week.
I'll work with Todd. Point well taken. Thank you. I'll work with Todd to get a poll out maybe soon, and we can settle that in. So I think that's it for the bylaw subcommittee.
Great. All right. I think we are now at the point of the agenda where we would accept the public comment, as is customary of the Public Records Advisory Council. We do set aside time for the public to address the council, and we ask that the public limit their comments to 2 minutes. But I don't think we have a big public attendance today, but I do want to make this time available for anybody in the public to address the council. If you would like to do so, please raise your hand. I don't see anybody at this time seeking to address the council. So unless there's anything else for the good of the order, and I'll give a quick pause here, I will move to adjourn. Nobody's raising their hands, so I would take, oh yes, Shasta.
Second? Is that what you need?
Oh, okay. I moved, Shasta seconded. We are adjourned. I hope you all have a wonderful week and enjoy the sun as much as you can. Thank you for your time today. Good work, Yufeng. Thank you for all your work on this. I appreciate it very much. And we'll see you at our, Todd, I guess the last thing I'd ask, do we have a meeting scheduled at this time?
We do not.
Okay. I guess I will talk with Todd about when we will convene the next meeting of the PRAC, and we'll reach out to everybody and with probably some kind of a doodle poll to make sure that we can get a critical mass. So thank you, everybody, for your attention today, and we'll be in touch. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.